Hi and welcome friends. If this is your first time here, my name is Tiffany and I'm the International Witch. Today I'm going to be discussing all of the books that I read in October, and I managed to read 26 books. So yes, I did complete Erin Smith's Bewitched book challenge, and it was tough. All my opinions on these books are my own, and you are welcome to like something that I hate. Now, the very first book that I'm going to be covering is the Monsters in Love anthology. This is Volume 8, Lost in the Swamp. Every year they come out with a different anthology with a different theme. So this year's theme was all about swamp creatures and stories that are set in the swamp or near a swamp. What I love about anthologies is you get a chance to read new authors that you've never heard from before, and if you don't like a specific story, you can skip to the next one and it won't affect your reading. The authors in Volume 8 were Evangeline Priest, Sophia Rose, Vivian Hart, Marina Simcoe, Dahlia Davies, DJ Russo, Ren K. Morris, Carla Doyle, S.J. Sanders, and Vera Valentine. To be honest, with a theme like Lost in the Swamps, I was expecting a lot of gator shifters, if you know what I mean, but I was actually surprised with the amount of different characters and story types that it featured. The very first one was called The Bone Witch by Evangeline Priest, and it features Baba Yaga, or the Witch Yaga, and she has to marry the swamp orc to save her swamp. And although the orc does help her, I was really happy that they kept her as a very strong female character. All the way up until the end, she's holding her own, which is rare in a romance story. My second favorite story was called A Taste of Twilight, and in this story we see a girl who's been cursed by a witch, and she's been cursed to kill a giant basilisk every single night, only for the basilisk to be rejuvenated the next day. And there were clues throughout the book that I was so sure I knew the twist, and boy was I wrong. So this one I really loved for the plot twist. Okay, now for the stories that I did not like. The first one was called Wetlands and Wanting by Sophia Rose, and I think this is the first story I've ever read from Sophia, and I did not like it. It was a scientist who's in the swamp. She gets lost, she comes upon the swamp creature, and she falls in love. This is a story that I have read at least 3 other times by authors who did it better. This was too fast, the writing made no sense, and it was just an instant, okay, I'm yours now, which was ridiculous. So I gave that story 1 star. And the second story that I was not happy with was actually a surprise. It was The Heiress by S.J. Saunders. Now, I am a huge fan of S.J. Saunders' writing, but this is the second time I've come across a book of hers that the editing was so bad that I could not read it. I found myself having to reread sentences and entire paragraphs to try to understand what she was trying to say because of the poor editing. And since this is the second book, it makes me wonder if she has fired her editor and is trying to do it herself, or if she has just swapped editors. But I had to give this story 2 stars. The story itself was a good idea. It was unreadable. After rating each story individually, I then added them all up and got an average. And the book rating overall for this anthology was 4 stars. The next book I read was The Monster of Dark Spell Comics by S.J. Saunders. This one I did not realize until I was reading it, and I was coming across some of the characters from The Good Char, which is a separate book and a different author. So I did some digging, and I found out that they were both part of the Creepy Court anthology. But unfortunately with the anthology books, once they have run for a while, they're pulled and you can't purchase them anymore. So I'm unable to purchase the anthology, but I really loved the setting of these stories. It's in the 1980s in a mall, and the mall is run by monsters. I really loved the Monster of Dark Spell comics as well as the Good Char. So I'm hoping that these authors will continue to individually release their stories, because you can't get the anthology anymore. In this story, Pashar is a nightmare demon, and he's on vacation in the Earth realm, and he runs a comic book store where all of his comic books can send the reader into a living nightmare. One night, a human girl breaks into the mall looking for a place to sleep, and she comes across the comic book store. She tries to steal a couple comic books. She puts like 3 or 4 in her backpack. Well, Pashar comes across her, and he's originally going to let her slide until he sees that she has stolen some of his comics. So now she is enslaved to the demon until she can pay back her debt. I think my favorite character in this entire book was actually the plant, Chewy. It's a demon plant, and it's constantly trying to kill the people who shop there, and they're constantly having to watch out for its tendrils. And it reminded me so much of Little Pet Shop of Horrors that I just chuckled every time. She's so sassy. I rated the Monster of Darkspell comics as 5 stars because I really enjoyed myself. Now, the next book I read is The Dark Lord's Guide to Dating and Other War Crimes by Tiffany Hunt. This was so hilarious. It reminded me a lot of the book Assistant to the Villain. So if you liked Assistant to the Villain, then I think you're going to love The Dark Lord's Guide to Dating. The Dark Lord needs a bride, and the bride has to have hero's blood to activate a powerful artifact. So, of course, he kidnaps one. Arabella has been a prisoner in her own castle while her father has been scheming to marry her off to the highest bidder. Needless to say, Arabella isn't happy to have her freedom taken away again. She puts a dagger to Cashmere's throat and makes a bargain. Teach her how to use her magic properly, and she'll play along. I really loved seeing Arabella's character because she starts out very strong, with the dagger to his throat, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's going to be so kick-ass. And surprisingly, she continues to be really strong and kick-ass through the whole story. She taps into her darker side of her powers, and I really loved her character development. And of course, I loved the campiness of the Dark Lord, like being unequivocally evil and okay with it. It does end on a cliffhanger, so I know that there's going to be a part 2, but I'm so excited for it. I've already pre-ordered it. I rated The Dark Lord's Guide to Dating as 5 stars. Now, my next book is actually a series of books. It's the Starfall Point series by Molly Harper. Every month, I'm reading a book for my pagan reviews. I'm reading a book at the same time just for fun. And I've always got a book on Audible going in my car whenever I'm driving. So these 3 books, the Starfall Point series, I listened to in the car on Audible. And they were so good, I just went one after another. So I wound up with all 3 books. The first book is called Witches Get Stuff Done. And it's our main character, Riley. She's just inherited a mansion from her dead aunt on a Michigan island called Starfall Point. And when she gets there, she encounters the librarian, Edison, who is her love interest. But she also finds 2 women that she becomes very close with, and they become her coven. And together, they are trying to unravel the mysteries that is the Shadow House. And book 2 is called Big Witch Energy, and this one follows Caroline, one of the other women. Her family is cursed, and if any of her family members leave the island for more than 24 hours, they'll die. And so she's trying to solve the mystery behind where this curse is coming from and why does it only affect her family. And her high school sweetheart, who left the island, got married, had kids, is now divorced, and he comes back to the island with his kids, and she takes on almost like a motherly role to his kids. Together, they all figure out and solve the curse that has been holding her back. And then the third book is called Never Been Witched, and it's Alice's story. And I felt so bad for Alice because her grandparents really treat her like crap. She is such a sweet person, but she is used to being taken advantage of. There's a new guy, Colin, who has just purchased the hotel in town. And she is helping Colin to refinish the hotel back to its glory days by sourcing antiques. Now, this one actually had like really spooky, creepy ghost, which is funny because the whole series is about ghosts, but it actually was so creepy that I had to turn on the light. So I think this one is an excellent series if you're just wanting something fun, kind of mysterious, kind of spooky to listen in the car. And I gave each of these books 5 stars. Okay, next up on the list is also another series. So far there is only 2 books out, but I know that there's a third one coming out, but it's the Barbarians of the Dust. And book 1 is called Rock's Captive. And Justine and her sister, they're down on their luck. They need money badly, so they sign up for this job. And they get there and they're put on a space shuttle almost immediately with no explanation. And the shuttle crashes and it crashes down onto a desert planet. They have no idea what's going on. Are they supposed to stay still? Is anyone actually coming to get them? Is this part of an experiment? So Justine decides that she will take one for the team and she's going to go and search for water because the group is very, very low on food and water. And she encounters Rock. Rock is an alien species, and his species has never seen women before. They do not have females at all. So at first few chapters of the book, he is trying to understand why this lone male is in his territory. And they can't speak. His species speaks telepathically. So of course that, hinders their communication. And one thing that I find really interesting is his species evolves with their man parts when they find a female. So he has no idea what is going on, what is happening to his body as his body is going through physical changes to adapt to Justine. And book 2 follows Tharn, which is Rock's friend. And Tharn is on the hunt for Justine's sister. While Justine was out in the wastelands trying to survive, trying to get food and water, her sister Jackie decides, I'm going to go see if I can save my sister. I need to find my sister. And so when Justine gets back to the shuttle, Jackie's gone. So they send Tharn after her. And so book 2 follows Tharn and Jackie. Now, I did give this series, both books, 4 stars. It was a wonderful series. I really loved reading it, but it was very, very slow paced, which, I get, it makes sense in the context of the story because they've never seen a female, so they don't even know what to be doing with a female. But to me, it also really came across as like an off-brand Ice Planet Barbarians, the series, except this is on a desert. So I did take a star off just because I couldn't get that out of the back of my head through the whole series. Now, the next story was so out of my comfort zone. I don't usually read dystopian Armageddon type stories, but for Erin Smith's Bewitched book challenge, one of the challenges was a book with the word moon in the title. So I grabbed Moonshine just to fulfill that spot. And I actually really, really, really adored it. Like, this came across as one of my favorites of this month. The story is a grumpy sunshine story where I actually think the author did a really good job with it. Liv was such a bubbly, positive person that she does get kind of annoying sometimes, and I was hoping for a little bit more character development from her. But Josh was absolute perfection. He was so complex. There were a couple of moments in the book where I was thinking, okay, he's being way too cruel, way too mean. But the more you get to learn about Josh and his backstory, it makes sense. He was lonely. He was never taught how to love. And as a matter of fact, his father beat kindness out of him, seeing it as weakness. So seeing him evolve and take care of Liv and really become such a sweet cinnamon roll was just chef's kiss. I do have to say the only thing I did not like was that the bad guy Wheeler kind of gets away scot-free. I hate it whenever the bad guy gets away. Now, the next 2 books I'm not going to go too much in detail with just because I do have book reviews. And the first one is Mexican Magic, Brujeria, Spells and Rituals for All Occasions by Laura Davila. And this one I specifically chose because it is of a different culture. This year has been all about me trying to branch out and learn as much as I can about other cultures and other ways of magic. And this, I think, was an amazing look at Mexican brujeria. Now, I am not Mexican and I do not live anywhere near Mexico. I'm in Italy right now, so I can't speak to the validity. I think it is absolutely amazing, but you are more than welcome to read it and make your own opinions about it. I loved reading about the Anima Sola. If you remember my bullet journal where I talked about the cult of bones here in Naples, that is Anima Sola, and I never knew that there was actual name for it. And so whenever I looked up Anima Sola, and it specifically says that it is very prominent in Hispanic and Mexican cultures, as well as Naples, Italy. And that's where I'm at. So it was really cool to see that tie. And I also loved reading about how they view Catholicism and how it works with their folk beliefs. I've always been very curious about how Mexican witches can use Catholic saints, almost like hoodoo and voodoo uses Catholic saints. So that was also very interesting for me. So I rated Mexican Magic as 5 stars. Now, the next book is called The Graveyard Wanderers, The Wise Ones and the Dead in Sweden by Dr. Thomas K. Johnson. When I saw this book, the title really pulled me in. And I just did a quick thumb through the bibliography to see that, oh, okay, there's a lot of sources. But it wasn't until I was actually reading and trying to research some of his stuff that I realized that he sources all of his stuff from his own book. Almost all of the sources are from Svartkunstböcker, which is one of his earlier works. So there's no actual sourcing at all. And I don't know how honest or true that is. Like, I don't want to have to buy a book of his to get the sources. Like, I almost feel like that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other. Like, you can't cite yourself as a credible source in your work. So while I did enjoy all of the recipes, it was fascinating. I definitely see this more as a recipe book than an actual spell book. But because there's no credible sources, I only give this book 3 stars. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe his other book has the credible sources, but this one does not. So I would not recommend it. But I do think it is fascinating. Okay, both of my next books are debut books by authors. First up is The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. And this was specifically because there was a prompt that I had to read from an author who was younger than me. And that's kind of tricky because a lot of authors don't list their age whenever, they sign their books. But with Agatha Christie, since she has passed away, I could easily find out when she was born. And The Mysterious Affair at Styles was her very first ever novel that she wrote. And she wrote it at 33. And this was where she introduced her character Perot. And it's definitely in her usual style of, 13 guests arrive and someone's murdered in a locked room. I could definitely see where she started. But I do think it's not as polished as her later works, which is understandable. And I also read this book because, number one, since it's so old, it's also completely free. You can read it online for free. And it's also short. Since I needed to read at least 24 books for Erin Smith's challenge, this actually ticked a really good box for me because it was so short that I could read it in just one day. Now, the next book is a horror story from the author Joan Sampson. Now, this book actually influenced Stephen King, and he cites her work as being a major resource of his. And this is just her debut novel, and it impacted Stephen King. So when you read it, keep in mind, this is her very first work, and as soon as the book was published, 2 weeks later, she died of brain cancer. So not only is this a debut novel, but it's the only one she ever got to write, and she never got to see if people enjoyed it or not. I saw a lot of people who were complaining that it's not as good as Stephen King, but once again, this was a debut novel of a girl before Stephen King was a really big thing. And this story is it's a horror story, but it's very subliminal. This auctioneer comes to town, and the whole story is told from the view of this small town family, and they're hearing everything secondhand by gossip. And the story is really slow and kind of hard to get into, but I think that's part of the story plot, because you want the reader to realize that nothing big ever happens in this small town. Someone new coming to town is the biggest gossip to happen. And so a lot of the story happens from secondhand. The sheriff comes out and you're getting gossip and secondhand from the sheriff. But what makes this story really good is it's a show of what one person can do slowly over time. This gentleman comes to town and convinces the sheriff that, hey, you need more deputies, even though this is a small town that doesn't even need really one full-time sheriff. But he convinces him, no, you need more men. And over time, he amasses pretty much a private army. And it starts out, he tells the people, hey, I'm just going to auction stuff that you don't need. And then the checks come in, everyone's happy. And then another round, hey, I'm doing another auction, you should donate stuff. And it becomes more of a push, like you have to donate, and less of a you should. And by the end, the auctioneer has a private army, and he's pretty much stealing everything from these people, and they can't say no. So I found it really fascinating, but it is a slow read. So I gave it 4 stars just because of how long it took me to get into the story. Okay, the next book on the list is called Dark Harvest, and it's a horror story by Norman Partridge. And from this point on, Norman Partridge is going on my author watch list because this book was so masterfully written. Like the twists and turns. I have never read a book before in my life where the author will flat out give you all the hints and you're still left completely unsure of what's going on. You actually get into the monster's mind in like chapter 3, and I thought, oh, okay, well, this is ruining the story. I already know how it ends. No, I was so wrong. By the end of the book, I am questioning everything I have learned. You jump from point of view to point of view, and it starts out like, oh, this is a small town, only one road in, one road out. Everyone dreams about leaving. I mean, you know, that's how it is in a small town. And you're like, oh yeah, I totally get it. And then all of a sudden, the author's like, well, everyone has had a brother who's been locked in his room for 5 days with no food and water, right? And you're like, wait, what? The whole story is boys from the ages 16 to 18 are eligible to do this run on Halloween night, and you have to kill Pumpkin Boy. If you successfully kill the monster Pumpkin Boy before he can reach the church in the center of town, your family gets this huge sum of money, you get brand new cars, a brand new house, and you get to leave the town. That's your one way of getting out of this little one-road town. And so you're hopping between points of view of different boys who are doing this run. And every little bit, like each point of view gives a little bit more story until the very end. And oh my God, the twist. I can't tell you why it's so good without giving the story away. But Dark Harvest is by far the best book I read in October. Okay, so the next book is a book that has been on my TBR forever, and that was one of the prompts for Erin Smith's challenge. And I love the 7 Horny Sins series by Marina Simcoe, but whenever the books come out, there's just something about the covers that just don't appeal to me. So I loved the first book. I purchased the second one sight unseen as soon as I finished the first one. And when it was delivered to my Kindle, it sat there for almost a year just because every time I saw the cover, it wasn't inspiring me to read. And I'm really a mood reader. So once I forced myself to sit down and actually read the book, I remembered why it was so great. Envy was such a sweet character, and I loved the way that they showed that even sins can be good and some of the good attributes can be bad. And Envy really used his power to better himself, and he was such a sweetheart. I really was rooting for him, and I can't wait for the next book. But I honestly hope she gets someone else to do the pictures. Next up on my list is Checked Out by the Chupacabra by Wendy Go. Wendy Go writes adorable and inclusive stories, and this one's about a chupacabra who needs to learn how to read. He's recently got a promotion at work, and that means he's going to have to do paperwork. But while chupacabras are excellent at learning foreign languages, he knows every language he's ever heard, he can't read or write. So he goes to his local library, and that's where he meets Odette. She's a sweet woman who's working around multiple sclerosis symptoms, and I loved watching them both grow together and learn and how to help each other. So I think this one was such a sweet, fluffy read, and I gave it 5 stars. Okay, my next 2 books are a series of books, but they're all set in the same universe. This is a place called Harmony Glen that is inhabited by both humans and monsters. The first book is called Never Been Gargoyled by Ava Ross, and Daisy inherits a large home on a sprawling estate. There's just one problem. It comes with a sentient gargoyle. Usually I eat up anything that has to do with a gargoyle. That's just my thing. But this book really fell flat. I can't put my finger on it, but it feels like I've read this exact story and there wasn't really anything new or compelling. So I gave it 3 stars. It's just a meh kind of read. And the second story I was actually really looking forward to, and it's called Foxer Upper. And the story is once again set in Harmony Glen, just like Never Been Gargoyled. And the book description says a handyman and a content creator clash. They don't clash ever. As a matter of fact, this story is too much like a slice of life. There's no villain, nothing to get over, no climax or anything. It's just Maggie and Gabe meet, they instantly like each other, she films social media content in his store, and they date happily ever after. So I gave it a 3-star as well because, once again, just meh. Not great, but not bad, just not what I was looking for. Okay, next up, once again, I was trying to knock out as many of these challenge prompts as I could. And one of them was for a gothic or horror novel. So I was like, well, why not a gothic horror novel? So I decided to try to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Obviously, it's a very popular story. Everyone knows it. And it was really hard for me to go into this story already knowing the story. So I gave it 4 stars just because it is a classic and I know the impact it has had on culture, but I was bored through the whole thing. The language was different than what I'm used to, obviously, in modern day. And like I said, I already knew what to expect from the story. And the next book is Misbehaving with Minotaurs. This is the final 8th book in the Haven Ever After series by Hazel Mack. And I was really, really, really looking forward to this story because I love Catherine and Annabelle, the sentient hotel that she runs in the Haven After series. And I was so hoping for her to have such a sweet story. And now this is a second chance romance between her and her ex, Minotaur, who was like her high school sweetheart. And Minotaur is so sweet. He is the perfect cinnamon roll. He takes care of everything. The playfulness between Manorin and Annabelle the house is adorable. He is just such a sweet cinnamon roll. But because the story is set up as a friends with benefits, no strings attached, I did feel like this book was more sex than plot. I really don't feel like it did anything as a wrap up to the series, and I was really hoping for more. Just like I said, 7 books of having Catherine and her sweet self and really wanting something great, and then being introduced to Manorin, who is also so wonderful. I really think this book could have been better. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, this next page is full of what I would consider my 3-star and below books, the ones that are utterly forgettable that I really wouldn't recommend. The first on that list is The Devil Made Me Brew It by Sarah Piper. I have read some of Sarah Piper's books, and normally they're very good, very action, but this one just felt so dull. I had to slug through it. So I gave it a 3-star just because it was an interesting plot, but too boring. The Librarian of Crooked Lane, it's a book that is set in a magic world and they're tracking down a magic painting, but they are two people who don't have any magic. Absolutely no magic happens in this entire book, which was kind of a letdown. And when I looked back and read the reviews, apparently this is a spinoff, and the first series by the author actually was all about magic, and this is a spinoff about the sun. So I kind of feel like I came in on the wrong side of the series. So I gave it 2 stars. The next one is a book by Kay Webster called Notice, and it is a stalker romance. And I don't mind dark romances, but there are some hard limits in here, like forced pregnancy and birth control tampering, that I do not agree with at all. If the author had left those out, this could have been an excellent story. But as it is, 2 stars, hated it. The next is The Saltwater Curse, and it was so boring and utterly forgettable that I can't even remember the characters' names. So I'm just going with 3 stars on it. And Fangs for Sharing, it had a really cute premise. I loved the idea of the main character being accidentally shot with and injected with something that creates a rhino shifter and her dealing with that. Like, it was a really good premise, but I felt like the author couldn't follow through. I really think the rest of the book, especially the middle, was so hard to get through that I really think it could have been better. So I gave it 3 stars. And finally, the Geekarella was, for the prompt, a book recommended by someone you trust. And this was one of Erin Smith's books, so I thought I'd give it a try. I had a really hard time getting through with it. It's a cute premise, but I'm just not big on the Cinderella story, I guess. So 3 stars for me. Okay, and now it's time to see how I did with the challenges. First, we're going to go with the Magical Readathon. And for my demonology, I have Emotion in the title, which is Monsters in Love. Book with Dungeon, Cave, or Secret Lair, which is Rock's Captive. And book by an author who is younger than you, and that is The Mysterious Affair at Styles. For my spells and incantations, I have luck, roll a d6, and I got the 100. So the Auctioneer was 188 pages, but I still count that as the 100. And a current spell trends released this year was Never Been Gargoyled by Ava Ross. For Elemental Studies, I had an O in Water on Cover, and that's the Saltwater Curse. And then for Conjuration, I had Circle on the Cover, and Mexican Magic fulfilled that prompt. So I successfully completed the Autumn Equinox at Orilium. Okay, let's see how we did with Erin Smith's Bewitched book challenge. For the first spell, Shadow Blanket, a book with a black or gray cover, that would be Notice by Kay Webster. A gothic or horror story, that would be The Auctioneer. And a book with the word dark in the title, that would be The Monster of Dark Spell Comics, so I successfully completed that one. The next spell is Familiar's Blessing, a classic book, which would be A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A book featuring a loyal companion, human or animal, that would be The Saltwater Curse. And 6, a book with an animal on the cover or the title, that would be Foxer Upper. So I successfully completed the second one. The next spell is Oath of Ink, and a book about books, writers, or libraries, The Librarian of Crooked Lane. A non-fiction book, that would be Mexican Magic. And a book by an author that's new to you, that would be Rock's Captive. So I successfully completed the third spell. The next one is Veil Whisper, a book featuring ghosts or hauntings, that would be Big Witch Energy. A book about family secrets, that would be Never Been Gargoyled. And a book about a graveyard, bones, or skull on the cover, and that would be The Graveyard Wonders. So I successfully completed the fourth spell. The fifth spell is Drought of Dreams, a book with a potion, poison, or elixir in the story, and that would be Fangs for Sharing. A book with stars on the cover, that would be Witches Get Stuff Done. A book that feels surreal, dreamlike, or whimsical, that would be Checked Out by the Chupacabra. So I successfully completed that spell. For Future Sight, the first one is a book featuring a prophecy, vision, or psychic, and that is The Devil Made Me Brew It. A book you've been fated to read on your TBR forever, and that would be Let Me Win You. And a recommendation by someone you trust, that would be Geekorella. So I successfully completed Future Sight. The next one is Lunar Light, a book with the word moon in the title, that would be Moonshine. A book involving magic, witches, or spells, that would be Monsters in Love. A book with plants or foliage on the cover, that would be Misbehaving with Minotaurs. And for the final spell, a book with a strong or fierce female protagonist, that is The Dark Lord's Guide to Dating. A book with fire or flames on the cover, that is The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And the final book is a book with a theme of resistance, rebellion, or survival, and that would be Dark Harvest. So I have successfully completed every spell on hard mode for the Bewitched book challenge. So now we get to the fun step, which is setting up the bullet journal for November's reads. And I'm using these stickers I bought from Paper Trail Plans. They're the Forage series, but they're so small that they looked tiny in my book. So I actually scanned them in and enlarged them, and I added a couple and collaged them, and so now I have something bigger that actually fits my journal better. Because these are professional stickers, I did not make these. I do not have rights to them, so I will not be able to share this layout for you guys. But I just wanted to show you that you can alter stickers that you purchase to make them fit you. And that includes stickers that you buy that have people on them. If you want them to have different hair colors or be a different race, whatever works for your journal, don't hesitate to do it. Once you've purchased the sticker, it's yours. Since I brought up the topic of shareables, I just want to take a moment. If this is your first time here, then you may not know, but I run a blog. And if you subscribe to the newsletter on my homepage, you'll get a code in your email, and just enter that code into the grimoire section of my website, and you'll get free access to unlimited printables. That includes bullet journal layouts as well as grimoire pages. All I ask is that you please don't pin anything from my password protected site onto Pinterest, please. Because of how many books I read in October and I didn't really have any more room on my list, I decided to just leave an open space for now, and I'll probably use pictures of the books this time instead of trying to make a strict list. And I wanted to add some more sticker potion bottles just to make it feel a little bit more witchy and magical. Okay, and now I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough so you can see all the books that I read in October. Leave me a comment below if any of these books are new and sound interesting to you, or if you had any different opinions on the books that I've read. Make sure to hit the thumbs up button if you liked this video, and if you want to see more content, be sure to subscribe. And if you stick around to the very end, here's a video that YouTube thinks that you'll like. Love you. Bye.